All right, let's start this off right. Everybody stand up. Stand up. I need you to do something. I need all of you to do something for me. I need you to take your right hand, and I need you to put it on the shoulder of the person to your right. Okay? Now, I need you to take your left hand and put it in the pocket of the person to your left. You wouldn't do it. Get your hand out of her pocket. So, how did I know you would do the first thing and know that you would absolutely not do the second thing or allow someone to do the second thing?
Well, it wasn't an absolutely, I thought it.
You thought about it. It's the other person got in your way. I know something about you, right? I have a shared experience with all these human beings in this room. We have a sort of a similar set of codes and behaviors in this culture in which we live. And so what I could predict the response I would get out of all of you. And really, as people, we move through every day like this, right? We make assumptions about the people around us, and we can predict the behaviors that will come from them when we do certain things, right? So if I give my wife some flowers, I can predict the response I'm going to get unless I'm giving them to her for the wrong reason, right? And I can predict that response too. I get into an elevator and I smile at someone, and I can predict that they're going to smile back. I live in the hard-boiled city of Philadelphia. If I cut someone off in traffic, I know what's going to happen, right? All of these are predictable responses because we're all human beings and we understand certain things about each other. In our built environment, you can see examples of this where designers have managed systems of symbols and signs in order to tap into what's already in our heads and elicit a particular response from us. A particular, frankly, an exact response at a particular moment in time. This is really important. And that's fundamentally the function of designers, to understand people in order to get them to do what we need them to do. And so I sit here this morning at these sessions and I listen to lots of folks who are wrestling with enterprise systems. And what's amazing about them is that fundamentally this is what they're all about, right? Getting people to do precisely what we need them to do. This is industry. We get up every morning and we try to get consumers to buy goods. In banks and financial advisory firms, we try to get folks to hand over the cash to our financial advisors. On our assembly lines, we try to get people to do exactly what we need them to do in a particular way. Inside our plants, we get these folks to manage our operations precisely as we need them to do the job. What I've found fascinating since the beginning of my career is that this is how we set about predicting the behavior of people. We rely on two fundamental definitions: business processes, these abstractions of behaviors that indicate in no way that there is a human being involved here. No part of this definition understands a single characteristic of a human functionary. It's just a prescription for how business needs to be executed, how a transaction needs to be carried out. It's a really good way of creating a definition for the second part of the equation, and that's technology. Those clear and concise definitions of business are exactly what programmers need to make computers do very precise things. This has been a 30 or 40-year tradition in how we've figured out to set up the operations of our companies. So I'll tell you a little story about the beginning of my career. So you know, just for, to be upfront with you, I am not a computer scientist, nor am I an expert in business. I have a fine arts degree from Carnegie Mellon, right? But I spent a career going out into technology programs to try to insert a concern for design. And in the mid-'80s, I was fortunate enough to be invited to work on Citibank's deployment of cash machines to the public. This was awesome because here was a bank who understood business process and had endless cash to buy technology, but sought me out because of what I knew as a designer. They understood that they could define the business processes to be as effective and as efficient as possible, and they could make computers do anything. But we were about to upset an apple cart that was centuries old. We were going to take banking customers out of beautiful marble lobbies and stick them on street corners with computers when they didn't even have computers in their homes or in their offices at this point. The big variable here was people. Would they know what to do in a dark night on a street corner? Would they be willing to interact with a machine? Would they establish some sense of order around these things when we deployed them onto street corners? This was the big variable. Not the business process, not the technology, people. They are fickle, they're confusing, they're annoying, they lie to you. They're all of these things. But what you need to do is get to the truth. So we spent an awful lot of time understanding what was important to these folks. What was their tradition inside this transaction? They had done this holding the hands of their mothers. They liked talking to that teller. They liked the order inside the lobby. They liked the sense of security. That taught us an awful lot about how these machines would be successful. So would people queue up on a street corner? Well, then maybe we would need to preserve some part of that former physical environment. Well, as much as they liked that imposed order, they didn't like standing in that line very long. So we learned that we needed many of these things together. And that issue of security, that was a big investment. It was a critical investment, but we put them in a safe place to perform this transaction. And even the voice inside this terminal replicated the voice of those tellers, the conversation that they were used to having with that human being on the other side. Citibank's cash machines remain the most successful deployment of cash machines ever. In the first year, they got a 70% adoption rate from their retail customers. That was astounding. We didn't spend $1 in training, not $1 in change management. And the reason was because we knew business processes better than everybody else? No. Because we had better programmers than anyone else? No. The reason was we understood people better than anyone else. So these business process definitions and these technologies, they're sort of two legs to a three-legged stool. We talk about business processes in my company as well, these are sort of the mechanical truths of business. And on the other end of the spectrum are the technological truths. And in the middle is this human truth that, frankly, the enterprise system world has spent years filling with cash rather than understanding. This is where change management, this is where training dollars get spent, and this is where Citibank took those dollars and spent them, a fraction of them, on design. So what's it look like in an enterprise when we forget that human truth? Okay, so the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, $800 billion to get the economy going again. Inside that budget was $20 billion for electronic medical records. Anybody familiar with this enterprise system event? Hospitals would get reimbursed around $14,000 per physician for installing these things over the last few years. So there was a huge rush in the healthcare industry to deploy electronic medical records into the physician practice offices and hospital floors across America. This is the patient chart being computerized. This is where physicians capture data at the point of care. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to technological success. A third person enters the exam room now. This is called a medical scribe. This, when I'm out there observing these things in use, this is usually a very attractive 20-something woman who's sitting on a stool quietly typing into the medical record while the physician interacts with the patient. I don't know about you, but when I'm alone with my doctor, I tell him a fraction of what's really wrong, right? And now I've got a 20-something hottie in the corner that I'm not going to happen, right? The human truth has been completely ignored. And maybe you can discount my fear of disclosing all my personal details in front of this person, but the business reality is something altogether different. $26 an hour to pay these people, that's around $45,000 a year per. And some of these physician offices are seeing 30% fewer patients because of this. The human truth was completely ignored. So we set about looking at our businesses. We create models like this in the enterprise, and we rearrange them, we make them more efficient, we drive them toward higher quality and greater speed. But there's something more to it. There's greater opportunity than efficiency. So I'll tell you a story about a global bank who showed up at our doorstep and asked us if we could make software more usable for their back office team. This is a group of 700 people in India who do the back office settlements of the post-trading day transactions, right? So the trading day ends in New York, and these guys are just making sure the books balance. 700 people working queues of tasks. What they wanted us to do was to take all of the disparate software systems that supported all of these disparate tasks and make it just a little more usable. Henry Ford had a saying that if I'd asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And when these people described this task they were laying out for us, it sounded an awful lot like faster horses. So we did what designers do, and that is go to the human truth. Go to where the people are and understand what's happening here. And we walked into this place, and these people were sitting at desks for hours and hours and hours a day, working queues of items. Each item had a specific set of tasks that they were charged with carrying out in a particular way. And they would move one by one through that work queue. We learned immediately that the least educated person of the 700 in this call center had one master's degree. That's an incredibly smart workforce, folks. That's wild, right? And we stood around the water cooler, and we heard those really smart people saying things like this. We could do it this way. Why don't they do it this way? Why is it always like that? What we were smelling, what we were hearing, what we were sensing was a knowledge of this business that transcended what this bank understood about their business. This knowledge of the business was in the hands of these people, and no one had decided to scratch at the surface and understand it. So I'll jump to the end. The system that's deployed inside this center does something very interesting. Yes, it organizes all those disparate systems into this comprehensive desktop that has nice tabs and can navigate around. That's fine. But what this thing allows people to do is to record alternative processes of performing those transactions. So I get a transaction in my work queue, an item to process, and I can switch on a recorder and show the organization the alternative method that I've cooked up. I can share that through social networking with people who are qualified to receive that alternative process so they can do it. And management watches these alternative processes unfold. If I achieve the efficiencies or improvements that I promise, I get a reward. The nature of this environment has changed dramatically. These people come to work every day to be in a contest now. They sit every minute of every day and try to figure out how to do this work better than the last prescribed method. This has changed the business dramatically. This has allowed this bank to tap into some brain power that was otherwise just being wasted. And the discovery was made just by listening and understanding. It's with an energy company in Europe, and I asked them to describe their sales process to me. They were having trouble selling contracts. And they showed me this. This is how our salespeople work. Now, a designer who's going out and watching these people is going to create a model that looks more like that. Just watching, just listening. Not asking, how should it be? Not asking, what do you want? Because, like I said at the beginning, they'll tell you crazy things. They'll lie to you, and you don't want to deliver on those things. But when you watch and you listen, you discover that that business process diagram didn't account for moments inside this transaction where the poor sales guy is trying to do a credit check on a customer, and the back office is taking 25 minutes to give approval for this sale. This is a customer who didn't, or a prospect who didn't expect to be interrupted that day, didn't expect you to even show up at their door. And we joke in the office that this could only happen in Britain, because if this was Philly, that guy would have been shot. But the human reality of this transaction can't be overstated. This is two people engaged in a conversation that need to be supported by technology. At the end of the day, technology is supporting these people. That 96-step process is now 6 steps. You saw on that slide, they were closing 1.7% of all of their deals. Now, they're closing about 36% of all of their deals. It's simply because designers took time to understand what the human nature of this business is. Now, I've used the term designer pretty liberally, or people tend to think of designers as like whacked out fashion designers, or guys with weird glasses that design funky buildings. But where I come from, designers are a whole mix of people. Fundamentally, they're all people who are focused on understanding people in order to elicit those responses from them. And so you can trace their roots to places like cognitive and behavioral psychology. You can trace them to anthropology and ethnography. You can trace them to architecture, graphic design, industrial design. This is what I call design. These are people who are worried about not necessarily what people think they want or need, but understanding people, understanding how they think, understanding what their priorities are, understanding what's influencing their behaviors, so that we can incorporate these things into the tools that support them in the business. So PJM Interconnect is a client of ours, and this is an example in the book. And there was a mention here this morning of big data, right? I spend a lot of time on Wall Street right now, nothing but data. Everybody's got data, right? PJM came to us because they were going to rebuild the systems that supported grid management, right? And so the displays look like this, lots of data, and lots of people very specialized in understanding that data. Our job wasn't to ask these people what they wanted, because frankly, they couldn't describe the future. They could only, if we did that, they would only describe the future in terms of what they knew, right? It's that faster horses thing. Our job was to get inside their heads and understand not what they wanted, but understand how they made decisions. And so when people talk about data and knowledge, you need to take it one step further and understand decisions. What are the things what do people need to do with the data? What are the activities or actions we need to elicit from an understanding of that data? We need to go back to the people. And so the end result was a lot of those types of displays being brought together into a single dashboard that translated an awful lot of alphanumeric characters into gestures on a screen that could be assessed at a glance. We went into a 911 call center, and we learned something incredible about people. This is the desktop of people who were answering emergency response calls. I sat down next to a woman and said, "How long have you worked here?" And she said, "I've worked in this building for 4 years." I said, "That's a weird answer. You worked in this building for 4 years? How long have you been doing this job?" And she said, "Oh, just a week." And I said, "What were you doing a week ago?" And she said, "Well, until that point, I used to clean this building." I said, "How did you land in this chair?" And she said, "They were shorthanded. And so they asked if I wanted a go. And so now I work here." And the more people we talked to, the more we learned that this was not uncommon, that people were showing up at this job, this incredibly important job, with very little training. And they were being shown a desktop environment that looked like that. Our job became clear that all of this business capability needed to be cash machine simple. People needed to sit down and use this thing. And now this thing actually hangs in the Museum of Modern Art because, I'm not kidding, it's in the Museum of Modern Art. Because it is so simple, it is so clear, and it's so successful in the hands of these people. So when I talk to SAP folks, it's about this point where they're all sort of scratching their heads saying, like, yeah, this is great if you're cooking up new systems from scratch. It's all wonderful. You're reinventing the world. That's fine. But some years in my company, 50% of our work is spent post-deployment enterprise systems, whether it's SAP or Oracle or Lawson or one of those PeopleSoft, really following in the wake of a release and huge training event where everyone's moaning. This thing stinks. I hate this system. I don't understand it. And you've got two sides of the house. You've got the business who's moaning, and you got the guys who rolled this thing out who said, I don't know what to do. Like, you know, they just want to complain, right? These people can't articulate what's wrong. They just know something's not right. And you can't expect them to tell you precisely what it is. And so when you take a designer and you give them a couple of days to crawl around inside an office and watch those business processes get carried out, you learn an awful lot. And so this is one of those key business processes being supported by SAP within one of our customers' facilities. And we came back with this diagram. We said, this is how this transaction is being carried out. This is how this process is working. And there was a huge sigh of relief from the SAP team. Phew, that's exactly what we wanted them to do. Well, that's great. So why are they complaining? And then the designer showed these notations that almost to a step in this process, the system was defeating these people. Things like column orders in tables. I get to a point where I need to make a decision, and the column I need is off the page. And so guess what? They don't scroll. So what have they done? Somebody said it this morning, they run a spreadsheet on the side, right? Inside all of these places, we see a lot of spreadsheets on the side, right? At one of these steps, the SAP system actually timed out mid-process. And so the user would lose their work to that point. This was one of the sexiest physical offices I've ever seen. Open plan, glass, the whole 9 yards. It's really cool. It was built for collaboration. Collaboration means people get up and interrupt one another. And the system didn't account for that. And so in this particular process, one of the famous quotes was, SAP is ruining my marriage. I said, what's that mean? She said, I can't perform this task at work, so I have to take it home at night. I can't get it done. What was missing here was a human truth. And what we were able to give the client was 300 changes to the configuration of their SAP deployment that ranged from column orders changing to terminology being adjusted to correspond to the language that was spoken inside that company, to some pretty expensive things. Who knew that to move an area code from the back of a phone number to the front of a phone number, the way it's supposed to be, would cost a couple $100,000? thankfully, some connections at SAP, got the job done for free. But post-deployment, there are tremendous design opportunities. But what you can't expect is for the human audience to accurately articulate what needs to happen. They can't do it. They don't know what's best. They'll take a guess the same way you'll take a guess. And you're likely to get no further. So these two definitions, the business process, the technology, this hardware and software configurations, and this middle human truth, it's not new. It's just new to the enterprise. There are wonderful examples of this working in the public space. And what's interesting is this human truth is focused on so well by so many in environments where people can walk away. When we're talking about the public in a retail setting, if they don't like the experience, if they don't agree with what we've presented, they'll turn around and they'll go across the street. And so these brands are forced to focus on that. I was talking to someone earlier, how many millions of these iPhones were sold during the worst economic recession since the Depression? Right? How many? They don't even make a phone call very well. But something about this thing touched us, and we had to have it. Target and Walmart, they sell the same stuff. I like going to Target. Something about it. They understand me. It's the same transaction, it's the same infrastructure, but there's something going on there that's right. I won't walk across the street to Walmart. Understanding this human component is an opportunity that all of us have. My frustration in my career has been that with these enterprise systems, the budgets, the efforts, the talent that go into them, we have this opportunity to not make people do what we need them to do, but get them to like doing what we need them to do. Can you imagine that? People wanting to do what we need them to do when they look at these systems, delighting in this software? It's possible. And fundamentally, this is design. Understanding people well enough that we elicit that response that we need from them. And it's possible inside the enterprise. So, I'm 10 minutes early. I was thinking, I am the last thing to stand between you and the bar, so 10 minutes, that's pretty good. Okay, everybody stand up. I'm gonna try this one more time. Here we go. Now that you know me, stick out your left hand, right? Palm facing sideways. Take your right hand, slap it against the other 10 times. So, by the book. Thank you. Good night.